Everyone, this is Ashley Ellenboss with Skyhouse Herb School and Apothecary, and today we are wrapping up our energetic herbalism series, and we'll be talking about dry conditions and then herbs to help you moisten them. And this is probably one of the more common ones that people come to me with. They suffer from dry skin, dry nails, dry hair, especially as we head into this autumn season. Dryness can tend to be more of a problem. So let's take a look at this today. Please, if you haven't subscribed yet, please click the subscribe. I'm always trying to get more followers to share my work. And if you like this video, please like it as well. Now we will go into sharing. So let's go ahead and I will share my screen. And yeah, we will begin this work together. So I will share screen. And I figured this out before. Okay, here we go. All right, from the beginning. All right, so you should be able to see this. Dry conditions is our topic for today. And this is what we will be working on together. So dry conditions, what are they? I want you to think about the earth. The element of earth is a really good way to think about dryness. Now, we're not talking about wet, fertile earth, in the equatorial regions. Earth without water and without warmth is dry. It's basically desert. If you think about Pluto or some of the faraway planets, that's Earth without water or without heat. So that is a good way to think about what dryness is when we don't have these other elements included. But we are going to talk about them. We're going to talk about, well, how does dryness happen? Because it can happen with either influences of heat or coldness. So think about we think about dry conditions, it's a lack of moisture, a lack of nutrition. And this is sort of the sad reality is that as we get older, we dry out. Babies are born all wet. They're like thick and juicy and they drool. And, like babies are just warm and wet. And as we get older, we get colder and drier. So that's, it just is what it is. But it's helpful to know that because when we're working with babies and we think, well, babies are naturally really wet and warm, we can think about how we might use herbs. And as people age, as they get dry and colder, that also helps us to naturally think about, well, what are going to be our warming herbs and our moistening herbs? So keep that in mind. Dryness is often associated with cold or heat. So here's our little wheel again. So we're looking at the element of earth, which is typically considered to be cold and dry, but dryness can also be associated with heat. So heat can cause dryness, as can cold. So let's look at this in nature. How does this actually show up in the earth? And that can be helpful for us when we're visioning how to do this, how to work with this element. So in nature, heat will dry things out. You can think about how excessive heat in the desert, for example, will dry out the soil and make it crack. And if you ever have had like a house plant where you haven't watered it and the soil has gotten really dried out, you pour the water on top of that soil and it doesn't absorb. It just sort of goes off the surface and then it finds its way to the lowest point. So it'll slide down the sides of your pot, but it won't actually penetrate the soil. So that's what heat can do. He can create that level of that sort of impenetrable barrier when heat affects and dries out the soil on Earth. The problem with that is that not only with our houseplants can the water not penetrate the soil, but what happens is then the soil doesn't receive nutrients from the environment. And that's what can happen to our body as well. So if we have a lot of excess heat, that can be from our diet, it can be from our environment, it can be from the foods we eat. If that's causing our bodies to dry out, then we're likely not able to absorb what the nutrients are we need to get from our food. So that's one way dryness and heat are correlated. Now, what about coldness? So if we think about the tundra or really cold environments, cold will tend to harden things. So if we have that hardened soil, it'll make it not only impossible for things to grow, but it also will make the water freeze, which makes it the plants are unable to grow when there's no liquid water. And so when we see coldness in the body, that can also lead to dryness because we can have a lack of circulation. So if we think about people that have, circulatory issues, usually the issues tend to show up in their feet and in their hands, which are the farthest away from the heart. So people that have Raynaud syndrome or cold hands and feet or diabetic neuropathy caused by circulatory issues will often tend to also have dryness in those areas. Now, the other simple truth about dryness is it can be from ding, 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 dehydration. And that's it. It can simply be you are not drinking enough fluids. And that, without heat or cold, can cause dryness in a lot of these problems. In herbal lingo, we often call dryness atrophy because what happens when you have dryness in the body over time, it causes the tissues to wither. And it causes the hormonal system to not activate itself. And so we have an atrophy situation in the tissues. We have a lack of function in digestive secretions. We have a lack of function of hormonal regulation. So we can think about things withering when there's not enough fluids. And the early signs, if you want to be like, am I dehydrated? Do I have any signs of dryness? Well, the earliest symptoms are overall dehydration. And the way you can tell is in your fingertips. So if you look at your fingertips and they're a little bit withered, mine look pretty good today. I drank a lot of water and I had some nettle tea yesterday with some burdock and licorice, which are sort of my go-to herbs. But if your fingertips are starting to wither or look like pruned as if you've been in the water, that's often a sign of dehydration. You can also see dehydration in the lips. If your lips are really dry and cracking, you need more water. And otherwise in the skin in general, you can see dehydration, especially along the sides of your temples. If your temples get really dry or your scalp is really dry and it's not fungal, if you have dryness in those areas, go ahead and start doing and following these protocols because it will be very helpful to you. Over time, dryness can lead to things like hair loss, weakness in the muscles, and weakness in the tissues. You can also get gas and bloating in the digestive system because your stomach and your liver and gallbladder are not secreting the fluids that it needs. So everything gets affected by dryness. You're going to see this in all areas and all systems of the body. Malnutrition is something that might show up as well if you're overly dry. Constipation is both a short-term indication of dryness, but also long-term. So, if your bowel movements are not the length of your fingertips to your elbow, and it's one solid, smooth, entity, then if you have, one of the things that you can see often with constipation is not just difficulty having a bowel movement, but if you have small, hard pellets or larger balls or clumps, those are signs that there is dryness in the body. And then infection, that can also happen if you have dryness, especially with dry cold, where your immune system will be deactivated and you won't actually have the fluid pathway activation and the circulatory function to be able to ward off things like colds and flus. Now, this slide is a little hard to read, but there are both oil and water pathways is what this says here. So your body, people often think, well, dehydration or dryness is only caused by a lack of water, but it can also be a lack of oil. So think about that too. We have these two different fluid pathways. So in our joint capsules, for example, we have both this fluid that keeps the joint lubricated, but we also have these oils and fats. So we need to make sure that our diet includes good, healthy, high quality oils. And these can be from nature, from plants. It can also be from animal sources. So if you tend to, if you have a very strict diet and you don't have enough high quality fats, then consider making some changes to add in more fat to your diet. Again, especially as we head into autumn and winter, which are dry seasons. So think about that as another option. Here they are. Here's the same slide, a little bit better looking. All right. Now, what do we do? how do we remedy dryness and atrophy? So these are 4 different approaches, and you can blend them. You don't have to just use one. So adaptogens are probably adaptogens and demulcents together are probably my top 2 directions to go in if someone is suffering from dryness. Now, with adaptogens, we do have some adaptogens that are more drying, so you will want to avoid very heating, drying adaptogens like Panax, ginseng. But our moistening, soothing, sweet adaptogens like astragalus and American ginseng and licorice can be really nice. And they happen to be demulcents too. And what a demulcent means is that it moistens and softens the tissues. It moistens them. So demulcents include anything that has sort of like a gooey, mucilaginous is another word you could think of with demulcent herbs. So we have the same ones. We have astragalus and licorice, but we also have things like marshmallow root and hibiscus flower. These are demulcent and very moistening. So think about maybe a combination of these. Also, plant oils. Again, I spoke about things from your diet, but I would consider maybe doing something like borage seed oil, flax oil, eating chia seeds. If you're not a vegetarian, you could do fish oils. Ghee is probably one of my favorite oils that is dairy based. But those are really, really nice. And then, you might be like, oh, astringents, wait a second, didn't we talk about that for damp conditions? We did. However, sometimes what can happen is if our tissues are too lax, if there's too much of that damp flowing, that can lead to dryness. And so sometimes just a little bit of astringency. And for me, I like salt. If you use a little bit of salt, which can be drying, it will help to hold fluids in the tissues. So you may want to consider pink salt, actually gray sea salt is probably the most moistening and astringent salt that we have. And then also things like sage and nettles are really nice here to help you hold fluids in. So again, you can build fluids through adaptogens, contribute fluids through your demulcents, hold fluids with astringents, and contribute oils with your plant-based and your animal-based oils. Now, the taste that's associated with building fluid is sweet. So think about all of your sweet foods. These are going to be the ones that are most nourishing to dried out tissues. So my number 1 would be something like oatmeal. You can think about all of your sweet root vegetables like carrots and parsnips and sweet potatoes and potatoes. White potatoes are a little bit more drying. So sweet potatoes are really good. And then you put a little bit of ghee on them or a little bit of your olive oil, right? All of that is really going to be good for building more fluids in the body and more oils. Okra is a great moistening vegetable. All of the sweet herbs that we'll look at. And then, when I say sweet, I don't mean go out and buy a chocolate cake. I'm really thinking more about foods that are naturally sweet, but you can have sweetness, adding it. Sometimes dryness too on an emotional level can be a lack of pleasure or a lack of sweetness in your heart. So sometimes we can even think about a sweet treat as being something to help us if we're feeling really hard and really dry emotionally. With each of these talks, we've talked about different plant families that tend to have characteristics that support these energetic patterns. So the mallow family has a lot of mucilaginous and demulcent herbs in them. So my top ones would be herbs like marshmallow, or we use the root, and you can eat the flowers. The flowers are actually quite beautiful and delicious. Okra pods, field mallow is another mallow edible and medicinal plant, and hibiscus. Now for the skin, my favorite herbs would be burdock and marshmallow, and these work really well as an overnight hot infusion. So what I would do is I would take maybe about 3 or 4 tablespoons of each in a large quart-sized jar, pour hot water over it, cap it, let it sit overnight, and strain it and drink it the next day. Now, if you tend to be suffering from more heat-related conditions, drink it room temperature or cool. If you tend to be more cold and dry, heat it up and maybe even add a little bit of something that's has a little bit more warming volatile oils, like maybe a little bit of cloves or cinnamon might be really nice. And then for your digestive system, if your digestive system's really dried out, then you may want to consider some herbs like bitter herbs to help increase those secretions. So some nice ones might be artichoke root, fennel is a nice one to add in. You could even add in things like gentian, but because you're working with dryness, make sure you also add in a mucilage. So I would do those bitters plus something like your burdock marshmallow. So those can work really well in combination. For nervous system dryness, so if your dryness is caused by burnout, like let's say you've been working, raising kids, running a business, whatever it is you're doing, and you've had your foot on the gas pedal, and you can feel that you have some nervous exhaustion, and then dryness is coming as a result of that, then this is where really I would recommend for you lean on your adaptogens, lean on your licorice, your Rehmannia, your American ginseng, your astragalus. And this is going to overlap with immune system tonics. So we have astragalus and licorice in this category too, because when your system is really depleted, your immune system is also going to be less active. So you may want to have herbs that cross multiple, do multiple jobs in the body. I also really like echinacea because it's considered to be a sialagogue, so it increases saliva production and gastric fluid production in the body. So for you might want to do a combination of adaptogenic herbs and immune tonics, including something like echinacea. And then some general tips. Again, I think herbs are great, but they work better when you're doing other things that support dryness in the system. So think about what foods are going to be moistening for you. How can you eat more soups and stews and, really warm pot meals or casseroles that are healthy and full of root vegetables? How can you add in more oils like olive oil, ghee to your diet? Those are going to be so important in addition to the plants. Avoid astringent foods and teas. If you're drinking a lot of coffee or drinking a lot of black tea, consider maybe adding milk to it or add a creamer, add some fat to help keep you from getting too dried out. Also with dryness, the tendency of dryness is to tend to overexert. So make sure that you're giving yourself adequate time to rest and digest. Eat a meal, lay down, do your work, take a break. This is going to help you from getting overly depleted. And then another huge tip, which I learned from an Ayurvedic practitioner I worked with, is that if you tend to run dry, the best thing you can do is to oil your body before you shower and before you bathe. And I know that sounds kind of it sounds like counterintuitive, I think is the word, because you think, well, aren't I just going to wash it off? Well, actually, if you oil your body, and ideally you can use warm oil on your body, warm castor oil is really nice, or really any warmed oil. Apply it to your whole body, then take your shower and bath, and it will lock in your body's natural moisture so that the water doesn't dry you out, because it will. Water will dry you out. So protect your skin, and you'll be amazed at how your skin is almost glowing when you come out of a bath or shower after oiling. And then and then just a little recap here. Here's my little sneak peek. And if you have dryness from heat, here are some tips you can do. So we talked about hydrating. That is actually true for any dryness. But here's a trick. Add salt to your water. And I mentioned gray sea salt, but pink sea salt, the Himalayan salt, can be really nice. But gray salt tends to be more moist, moistening and moisture holding. Even if, like, you can tell if you buy it in a bag, it's like heavy and almost wet in itself. So try adding, I do this when I travel. This was something I learned from one of my herb teachers, Margie Flint, is take a pinch of gray sea salt, add it to your water when you're traveling, bring a little bag with you, and then just add it. And you'll be amazed at how your body will rehydrate, because travel can be very dehydrating. Watch overexertion, use your adaptogens and mucilage, and give yourself some sweetness. Add sweet foods to your diet, warm but not hot sweet foods. And then what about cold? If you're suffering from dryness from cold, hydrate again. Increase warm, moist foods like soup. Warming immune tonics like licorice and echinacea work really nicely together. And then really consider to use those oils, warming foods, and oil your body before your baths. So I hope this is giving you some ideas. Again, this is the season for dryness, so be proactive and start to hydrate and protect your body in these different ways. I want to thank you for listening to the series. This was the last part of this energetic herbalism and how to use herbs effectively by understanding herbal energetics. This is the last class of the series. So if you haven't listened to the other parts, please go back onto my channel and you can watch all of these parts to get the full picture. I also will post new talks every Monday, so please subscribe and you'll get notifications to see my new talks, and sign up for notifications. You have to do that too, I guess. Otherwise you won't know. And then I'm teaching a course, so look out for my course description and course link in this talk. If you go into the comments and into the description of this class, you can look at our Roots and Spheres course starting in January 2023. My husband and I will be teaching this year-long course where you will learn about how to pair plants with the planets and some of the ways that you can support yourself through some of the more challenging planetary aspects that will happen over the course of the year. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you again soon.